welcome to the V&A on today's the V&A's Makers Day. I'm Michelle Ogundehin, the Editor-in-Chief of ELLE Decoration, and we're here to discuss designing for today's digital world. Hello also to our online viewers, because in the spirit of that title, I believe that we're live streaming this via Periscope, which is very exciting. I've no doubt it's going to be a very lively discussion. But we only have an hour for what I think there'll be a lot of questions and a lot of debate. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. Oh, I think I've got a little, here we go. So we have Ruth Wassermann, who's been design director at MADE.COM since October 2013. And prior to that, you were also in charge of all things design at Colle, and you've designed for John Lewis, Marks & Spencer's, Laura Ashley, among many other people. Next to her is Fabio dal Colle, who's community manager at MADE.COM, which is a digital design firm based in Italy that essentially crowdsources solutions to problems, design problems posed by its clients, but all online. But I am going to ask him to explain that a bit more for us later on. Next to him is Sebastian Conran, who, as well as running his own studio, designing magnificent things for anyone that's anyone, is also designer in residence at Sheffield's University of Science and Engineering. And next to him is Katrin Baumgarten, who is a technology artist and interaction designer, whose work's been exhibited both here at the V&A as well as at MoMA, and you also work for the design consultancy Hirsch & Mann. And interestingly, the opening statement on the Hirsch & Mann website is, "The future's already here, we just want to distribute it evenly," which I think is an interesting statement to have kind of resonating in our head as I pose my first question to everyone, which is, the title of our discussion is Designing for Today's Digital World. But by way of establishing, if you like, each of your standpoints, what do you think we actually mean by today's digital world? Shall I start with you, Ruth?
Thank you. So I think it's quite tempting to think about today's digital world as a kind of utopia or even a dystopia in the form of something kind of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in actual fact, I think the digital world augments and improves the life that we're already living. It's a kind of constant beta version of the past. So it's something in a way more akin to, if I'm using the film analogy, The Fifth Element, where it's got technology and an element of the future, but all the dirt and grime of what is essentially a living, breathing planet. And, you know, we're still humans, we're still animals, and we still enjoy craft and the tactile nature of physical objects. So it's about using technology to augment, improve, and assist the life that we live as people on a planet.
Fabio?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Michelle. I think that digital world today is a way to keep people close to other one all around the world. And that's so interesting because you may understand new culture, a new way of develop then physical product in a digital world, so that is in a faster way. So I think that's very interesting, the way how we can connect people all around the world in a simple way and in a faster way.
Sebastian?
Digital has become synonymous with technology, and what we try and do is transform science, technology, and engineering into sort of user experience and culture. And I guess what we're saying is that, you know, humans will always be analog. You know, digital, the rate of change in the 20th century was fairly linear compared to the exponential rate we're getting at the moment. Excuse me, sorry.
Katrin, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, so for me, it goes into a lot of different aspects of life. So today's digital world for me on one hand means that there's much more possibilities in storytelling for people, for audiences, than today's digital world in meaning for in manufacturing. There is a lot of possibility of disruption, of disrupting old manufacturing processes and kind of automating it, but also like giving the audience a power to co-create. And then I also think that the designer has much greater possibilities now to like think about and communicate the why rather than just the what.
Sebastian, did you want to come back in for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, is this working? Getting back to the fact that we're analog people, you know, we eat, we prepare food, and a lot of it is very sensual, and you know, digital isn't really. I don't think of it in terms of in sensual terms, and I think in designing technology, we must make it human scale, and it needs to be more sensual.
Okay, so we've got this idea of it both being an agent of improvement, of connectivity, and I really like what you're saying about storytelling, but I'm thinking right now we're operating in a very different landscape to even 20 years ago, and in the context of trends, it seems at the moment the big thing is that people are chasing experiences. It's less and less and less about things, almost. So I'm wondering, Ruth, if I start with you, how does the designer today then inform what people want if the big picture says it's not stuff? So regardless of all this fabulous technological layer over the top of it.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I suppose we, although there's a lot of talk about people not wanting stuff, I think that people actually consume more and more things. And the idea of experience in the context of what we do at MADE is the whole package to the thing that we're selling. So actually furniture is, well, to use Sebastian's word, quite analog. It's quite a low-tech thing as an object, and it's changed very little in the last couple of decades, but what's changed is the mechanisms around it, so that the experience that we're providing is the experience of purchase, the experience provided by the brand and the brand ethos that surrounds our products. And then for us, you know, we're selling that very low-tech thing in a really high-tech way online and using all of those mechanisms to provide the experience around it.
So within that context, Sebastian, because I know you're working in teaching, how do you teach someone to be a designer today?
Well, I don't teach. I enable people to learn. I think is what we the design museum we'll talk about. It's learning rather than education, and I think that's an important thing. And I'm terribly sorry. The thing about being a designer is that, you know, when I went to design college, I knew what being a designer was like. I'd been brought up with design. But then a lot of the people that were at college with me, their parents didn't understand what they were doing being a product designer or learning industrial design. And I think people have a lot more understanding of the possibilities of what design is now. And, you know, it's, you know, design is a legacy of thought, and it's the way you approach imaginative thinking, I guess.
Well, that's an interesting point to pick up on. I mean, Katrin, I wanted to ask you, do you think increasingly the role of the designer is to create things that we, the consumer, didn't even know we wanted?
I disagree actually, but I think the designer should enable the consumer to make informed choices. So nowadays, I think it's amazing. Like I think what MADE.COM is kind of like a little bit like playing onto. You are not just buying the product. You're buying how it's manufactured. You're buying like the ethos of a brand. You're buying sorry, let me start from the beginning. I think nowadays, I think everyone can be a designer and can take part in the design process, but the interesting bit is that me as a consumer, as an audience, I have so much choice that I am looking to people like MADE.COM, and yesterday someone in a talk said we are the curation nation. So like we are actually looking for curation of the choices we can make. So like we mean looking for filtered down amount of offers basically.
So you're saying that it sounds like there's a twofold thing here. I mean, one, I personally disagree with the statement that everyone can be a designer. I don't think that's true at all. But then on the other side, you've also got this thing where you're saying it's about curating. Because one thing I wonder is there really anything new to be designed? And surely that's where brilliance and genius comes in, isn't it? Anyone would like to pick up on that?
I think having an imagination is, you know, creativity is wisdom and imagination put together, and it's trying to encourage people to develop their imagination, because children have a great deal of imagination and we somehow lose it, you know. It gets lost on voyage somewhere. You know, picking up on the anyone can be a designer, yes, anyone can be a designer. Anyone can be a doctor. All you have to do is walk into a pharmacy. If I've cut my finger, that's fine. But if I've got brain concussion, I need something a bit more serious. I need someone with a lot more experience. So, you know, designing there's a big spectrum of design skills, and it's, you know, a web designer is great for what they're doing at, but they might not be appropriate for designing furniture, for instance. And so I think we've got to, you know, design is this sort of nebulous word we use, and it can mean so much these days.
And particularly if you then layer technology over it. I mean, Fabio, the way that you work now seems like probably a good time to explain a bit more about how DeSalle works as this kind of platform. If I understand correctly, you have your clients pose design problems, and then anyone can proffer a solution to it.
Yes, exactly. What you say is correct. So DeSalle is an online platform. We do innovation and design. It's right when Sebastian says it's something nebulous. When we say to our client we do design, they think about everything. Okay, so we usually specify we do product design. And what we did, for example, with MADE.COM was starting a competition with all our community. We have now 70,000 people coming from all around the world, from 180 countries. That is very interesting. And this is why digital is so important, because we can keep in contact, MADE.COM, for example, with someone all around the world that probably never did or never heard something about MADE before the competition. And that is very interesting. On the other side, yes, it's how we connect the company with the person all around the world is very interesting. I think that not everyone can be a designer, but everyone can have an idea, and that is very interesting. We start from a problem. With MADE.COM, we start something general about to think what you really need in your house. And the idea can come from the mom, from the children, and say every day to her mom something, from the dad, or from a designer. And I think that ideas, it's what we are looking for. Then obviously, if you don't have the skill to develop something, and if you are not a designer, probably you are not able to make a 3D or a prototype, etc. But you can have the idea. And this is what DeSalle wants to do. We are in the middle of the company and the people and all the designer ideas. And I think that's very interesting to be able to connect this new designer. Probably in the future day could be a designer. As Sebastian said, if you study to be a designer, perhaps you can become a designer. But for sure, you can have ideas. And we trust in that. So everyone can really imagine the new idea. Internet is born from an idea to someone to connect people. A table is born, I don't know, century ago, thousands of years ago, but was an idea of someone to eat not on the floor. So I think that this is very important for us.
So is the objective to try and find out what are the missing pieces in the product design puzzle?
Exactly. And that was also the theme with MADE.COM competition.
Okay, and how many of the products that you've, or how many of the ideas have gone on to become real products?
Okay, for example, now with MADE.COM, just yesterday night, we announced the winner. So probably we are going to production, they are going to production with one product, but they find out 23 interesting projects. Just imagine that from their competition, we have received more than 1,000 design proposals. That is huge. It's impossible for every kind of client to have a design team inside the company. We work with big brands like Luxottica, Barilla, ELLE Coffee, etc., Braille, Replay. We have now online on our platform very big client. But anyway, also if they have big design studio inside the company itself, it's interesting how they can find the new idea from someone that they never known and they never meet probably, and we come back again to the digital world. They don't need to meet this person. So the person at home, they can work without going away, travel, spend money, but they can give your idea, and that's very interesting.
But surely if ideas are the kind of the currency of design, they're the most important thing that any one person can hold on to. So effectively, are you getting all these ideas for free? I mean, Ruth, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I suppose there's two ways of looking at it. So in a sense, it's asking lots of people to put in a certain amount of risk into designing something that may or may not come to fruition. I think, that's reasonably common amongst most creative industries. So if you look at a design ad agency, for example, they would always ask somebody to pitch a concept in advance of then working it up into a real campaign. So I suppose that is what we're asking. It's a few rendered images of an initial concept that we then take and work with people into a kind of fully formed project. So I think, I can be devil's advocate and say, yes, it's unfair, we're asking 1,000 people to put in a lot of work, but on the other side of it, it's really gratifying actually to be able to give people an opportunity to have something made who wouldn't ordinarily have the outlet for it. It's kind of, like the X factor of design, you might say, and in the end, we find a gem who is somebody maybe who has design training, somebody who maybe doesn't, it's not a prerequisite, and we can, or just an emerging designer who otherwise would find it very hard to find their voice on a very crowded stage. So we're able to make that design a reality, put it to the public, and give those people an opportunity to have their design, chosen by the consumer.
So I mean, that sounds like that's using technology as one way to promote what then sounds like quite a traditional way of designing, but I'm interested to drill down a bit more into kind of how technology itself is really changing things. And Katrin, I think I read an interview that you gave where someone had made the statement that just because we can do stuff doesn't mean we should. And so I'm wondering from your perspective as a technological artist, what's the responsibility of the technologically empowered?
Well, this can go quite in a deep discussion. I mean, if you nowadays look at massive companies at Google and where you can get data from and how smart your smartphone is now, and so the responsibility for me as a designer is to make objects which care about the consumer and which have the consumer in at first interest, so like to not misuse any of my data, and also to not do anything which wouldn't be in favor of the person. I think we cannot stop technology in a way like becoming more and more integrated, but that's like an opportunity as well. So for me, at some point materials will be so smart that this sofa, for example, the yarn will know what my body temperature is and will automatically, so at the moment I feel quite warm under the light, but I will automatically react to it, and that's in favor of me and not using my data to then go to my health, to my doctor, or to in comparison to my employer and say, yeah, she's not actually performing quite well, for example.
Because there is, I mean, I think you're alluding to this idea of the Internet of Things, where everything is connected, which on the one hand seems that, oh, that's great, you know, it's going to relieve me from the responsibility of remembering to switch my heating off, or even switching my kettle on. I understand I can have a kettle that's connected to my iPhone. But what intrigues me is from the security aspect of that. So, okay, my kettle is connected, which means that my kettle, if hacked, could actually provide access to all my data. So how, Sebastian, do you go about designing things that seem mundane, but actually could provide access to really sensitive information about me?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you're always going to get sort of dark, smoky rooms in Belgrade and Lagos where people will not have your best interests in mind. And, you know, so... you know, if I knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be here at the moment. But sorry, I'm not trying to get out of it like that. But it is the Internet of Things and actually having the connected home, and to just be able to say, "Oh, kettle, start boiling." I mean, you don't need the smartphone, or you just tell the kettle to start boiling, and the way that voice recognition is going at the moment and things like that is, theoretically, one could do all of these things. But actually, I quite like doing things for myself. You know, theoretically, I could go to Waitrose, get a ready meal and put it in the microwave. But I don't ever do that. You know, like a nice middle-class chap, I go to the farmer's market, buy my raw ingredients, chop them up and do slow cooking, and I get pleasure from cooking the meal. In fact, I probably get as much pleasure of cooking the meal as I do eating the meal. And so, you know, life isn't going to be just about having everything automatic, and because it's kind of denatures life in some ways. But where this Internet of Things will come in very interesting is when you've got issues with enhancing the experience of later life, and this is something I really passionately believe in, and I think there's huge opportunities for people to, you know, that the keeping people so that as independent as long as possible. I mean, in Japan and in the UK, we're all going to be living much, much longer, and there aren't enough carers to go round. And so how are we going to do that? I'm going to be 80 in 20 years, you know, who's going to look after me? I want to be able to look after myself.
Well, I mean, I think there's something really pertinent there, because I mean, I found a fact that there are almost 14 billion connected devices in the world at the moment, and it's expected to reach 50 billion in the next 5 years. And again, on the one hand, you think, oh, how exciting, I could do lots of things right here. But on the other hand, picking up on your point, do I need to? I mean, is it all really just a massive gimmick?
I think in a way I agree with the idea that you lose out on something, because the thing that worries me in a way about everything being connected is losing the element of chance encounters, you know. I mean, even now people find it hard to date anywhere but online, so it's kind of Tinder and things like that, and just the idea that things can happen, not just things being organic, but things can happen in an organic fashion. I think the idea of the Internet of Things takes away from that. And the flip side of that is when people talk about how intelligent all the digital technology can be, and the idea of the artificial intelligence that can almost create that chance, then that becomes kind of mind-blowing and almost more scary to think about creating chance in that sense.
I mean, Fabio, with some of the ideas that people are posing on your site, are you seeing a lot of people asking for, I don't know, intelligent items of cutlery or moving tables, or what?
No, to be honest, at the moment, yes, we believe in Internet of Things. We think that, okay, usually people are scared about data, etc. They are important, they are your life. I think that my dad today just tell me, hey, are you buying with credit card online? No, they stolen your number and your money. Okay, so it's normal for us because we are younger, and now we buy every day, also at the supermarket with the credit card. So it's normal that we are scared about our data, but on the other side, our life in a way is simpler. We find out some new stuff that can be useful for us, for our life, and also to care our person. So I think that it's very interesting. On our website, yes, somehow they try to keep, our designer try to keep focus on the brief. So if they know that the client is not working on Internet of Things, sometimes they put some new intelligence form of stuff inside new project or new object. But it depends really on the client. So everyone is focused. Also, Dissolve.com is a new way of the digital world to connect company or just people and designer with other designer. So yes, I think that they think every day to introduce something new in the world, and so in the furniture, in the object itself. But no, it's not that they always do that. That for sure.
Sebastian?
I think you've got to think about technical redundancy, you know, the lifespan of an iPhone. I mean, they've been with us for 7 years, and I think I've had 4, you know. And, you know, and how many tables have I bought in that time? I expect my table to see me out, you know, and I don't expect to have to get a new table every 2 years. But if you build intelligent furniture, which has got technology in it, and you know that technology is going to be redundant, well, you're just designing landfill. And, you know, we have to be able to separate the technology from the table so that we can make intelligent furniture, but it's not, you know, chained to the current technology.
Well, Katrin, I'd like your opinion on this, because we've talked about the ability of technology to improve our relationship with things. We've talked about it connecting to things, but I think it's a very real question. Is there actually anything left that needs redesigning, or are we just recoloring, retweaking, adding a few microchips?
I think it's about like materials becoming more intelligent still.
So the materials that the products are actually constructed
materials,
from.
I think it's going even into a level of like nanotechnology, which will be invisible to our naked eye. The table, I think this is a more further future, and I think, yes, technology might become redundant, but we still want to explore the possibilities of having a connection to an object which goes past just the use, because it might be, everything becomes more intelligent. I feel like my smartphone can do so many things now, but and I actually right now feel connected to it, because this is a moment where I connect to my parents, also they're in a different country, I connect to my friends, I think that's why there is so much more further to go, because at the moment the iPhone, like you say, it lasts 2 years, it's like a metal block and that's it. It's not actually, it's quite detached from a humanized piece of technology. It's not, it's pretty abstract for what it actually does to me.
So I think in there you said that products today, it's not just about use. But I thought that was one of the great foundations of all design, that it had to be useful and hopefully also beautiful, etc. I mean, Ruth, what does this mean if we're now designing products that actually aren't about the way we use them?
Well, to be honest, I think that, you know, designers do talk a lot about use, but as well as being a furniture and product designer, I love fashion. And I think, you know, every piece of clothing or fashion that you buy, it has a use, but the external use, like a jacket or a dress, that's not why I'm buying it. So for me, those things, it's about fashion, style and storytelling. And I think that when you talk about can we create new things, it's always also about creating a new story. So, you know, there's new technologies that we can use that actually create these very analog basic things in new ways. So For example, if we look at textile design, it's been hugely changed by the fact that we now have digital printing technologies, and that's something new and digital, but that helps to create that very analog and something very beautiful, something that has a real kind of style, look, appeal to it. It probably has a use. If we make a cushion, well, it probably has a use in making our home look beautiful as well as being quite comfortable. But, you know, it's a way, for example, that we can create that storytelling, create the look in using the kind of new digital technologies.
And okay, so let's talk about 3D printing then, because this was hailed as the great kind of harbinger of the new industrial revolution. But, I mean, how does a 3D printer actually help me in my real life? And I know that, Sebastian, you're working at the moment on, well, you explain it, because
Well, I mean, we've designed a couple of 3D printers, and there are different types of 3D printing. There's the extrusion 3D printing that people can buy for their homes and is fairly inexpensive. And, you know, the ultimate one of these is that you put empty plastic bottles in the top and products come out at the bottom. That's my dream 3D printer. But then there are ones that can print in literally gold or titanium and things like that. And they're really very expensive. And you can make bits for Formula One cars and aircraft are made using these machines. And they're not really making people redundant. But when we get machines that will be able to knock out a pair of jeans or make a pair of shoes, or, you know, these things that are, you know, at the moment they're made on the other side of the world, they're put into containers, they steam over to Europe, and then we buy them in fashion stores and things like that. But when we've got machines that can do that, that are in the UK, and instead of having warehouses, people will have these machines sort of knocking out stuff as people buy it, so that that takes out the risk of having to warehouse and keep stock of these things, then there's going to be an awful lot of people somewhere that will be out of a job. And so what are people going to be doing with their time? And, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to reintroduce craft and to actually celebrate the handmade rather than the machine-made.
So would you imagine that things made with a 3D printer, does that count as machine-made or handmade? Seeing as though usually one-offs and someone had to handcraft the design that chucked the bottles in.
Yeah, I mean, the 3D printers, as we know them at the moment, are quite a long way off being able to produce particularly useful items, the ones you'd have in the homes. So it's a debate that's going on with craftsmen. You know, it's like, you know, should the crafts councils be supporting 3D printing, or, you know, people 3D print jewelry and that's craft? And is the craft what happens in your mind, or is it just another tool? You know, would Grinling Gibbons be using a 3D printer now if one had been available in the 17th century? I suspect he probably would.
Well, it goes back to kind of what we were discussing earlier. It's like, does design start with the idea, or does it start with how it's manufactured? I mean, Katrin, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you in some ways. I think actually it's going to be a divide. I think what is like, there won't be a middle bit. There will be like, yes, the beautiful handcrafted profession will be still like an item of luxury, but this is something the machine cannot do. And then there's, on the other hand, like the machine who can do the profane, the normal. And in this moment, I think that's where the everyone can be designer comes in for me, like the possibilities for like me at home being my own problem solver, my own, my chair joint broke, I can print my own, I can repair things. That's a really amazing opportunity and possibility for empowering the everyday person, I think. And then to the same way, we still need someone to design these tools and design rules around them and help empowering people.
I mean, I love this idea that, you know, at home, if your table breaks, that you'll just print off the bit or the component to fix it. But I think that's a product of you as a very creative and imaginative person. I mean, me, I'd be just like, the table's broken, you know, do I glue it? I don't know, I'm not seeing how a 3D printer is really, really going to help most people in their daily lives, because the important subtitle of our talk was this two-way thing, that how design changes both for the consumer and the designer. So I'm constantly wondering, like, what do I as the punter get from all this fabulous new technology? And I'm still not sure that I'm clear about it.
I do think that 3D printing is going to be the next Lego and Meccano. And I think once kids who are getting more and more technically literate, and the software programs are getting easier and easier to use, they will be doing these things. So they'll be up all night designing something, and then they'll put it into the 3D printer, and then they'll go off to school and come back, and it'll be all ready. I mean, we have our 3D printers running overnight, but they make such a noise. You don't want it doing this noise in your bedroom, so you'll do it while you're at school, I guess.
So you're saying that you think the future generations are actually just going to be that much more creatively literate?
I mean, when I was 13, I'd made the entire Airfix catalogue. And, you know, and it's the new Airfix kit, you know. I mean, I would have loved a 3D printer when I was a geeky little kid. And I think because the kids have this creativity and they have this fantastic imagination, I think they're going to be able to do wonderful things with them. And when I call it a toy, I'm not being disparaging about it, and I think it will enable them to be designers. But you know, if there were 3D printers in the local Timpsons on the high street, apart from, you know, making a new heel for your Gucci or whatever, I mean, what are they going to make? Are you going to say, oh, a bit's fallen off my washing machine, can you make me another one? Because there are so many different types of plastic and so many different specialist polymers. And the polymers, you've got to have exactly the right plastic and exactly the right alloy to do the job properly. And I think 3D printers that are going to be able to do that are a bit further down the line.
Ruth, do you see a day when you're going to be kind of 3D printing out all the products from MADE.COM, or just sending I don't know, an email to the consumer and saying, here, print it yourself?
That would be amazing. I mean, I'm interested.
Let's really cut out the postage, shall we?
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested. Sebastian talked about shoes twice, and there's two different things about shoes that really interest me. So one of the things you mentioned was about the elderly, and I saw my grandmother find it increasingly difficult to find shoes, and I think 3D printing could have great potential in terms of personalized printing. So having a basic design guide, if you like, for something where the designer's job is to create the archetype, but then the consumer has bounds that they can go through. So somebody can print a shoe that's made directly for the shape of somebody's foot. So for the elderly, for example. And we're already seeing shoe personalization from companies like Nike, for example, and that's not 3D printing, but that's using digital technologies to take a basic prototype, but allow the consumer an element of personalization where, you know, there's billions of possibilities, so no two shoes are alike, but they kind of look alike, except the pattern. And you know, I think Nike started doing that 10 or 20 years ago, but it's actually just now that the technology has meant that it's affordable and something that the consumers can buy into.
I mean, we've got a 3D printed cycle helmet where you go in, get your head scanned, and they'll make you a helmet which fits you exactly. If it fits you really well, it'll do a much better job, and it's got built-in crumple zones and all sorts of other things. So I think that's the sort of product that you might have 3D printed in the same way as the shoes where they scan your foot, and then they will make you a liner or an inner that will work with a variety of outers.
And aren't you working with someone at the moment so people can buy a printer and put it together themselves, like you're buying it as a kit of parts?
Oh yeah, you can subscribe to it, and you get one piece at a time, as the Johnny Cash song goes. And it's you know, 60 parts, and it's 400 quid or something like that. But you will be able to buy it in John Lewis in a few months' time anyway, pre-assembled. But but it's a domestic 3D printer, and it's designed for be used by children. It's got safety features in, and it's a lot quieter.
Wow, 3D printers and John Lewis, who knew? But
Oh, don't quote me on the John Lewis bit, but
okay.
sorry. Shops like John Lewis, I should say.
You can email Sebastian now.
So I've got some more facts at my fingertips because I want to talk about robots too, because after 3D printers, robots are the things that everyone seems to be talking about. Apparently, it's already a £1.7 billion industry, and I think South Korea specifically has decreed that every household should own a domestic robot by 2020. And I understand there are now robots available that can vacuum, they can clean your barbecues, they can clean windows, they can mow your lawn. But again, where is this all headed? Because I'm envisioning like little mechanized drones buzzing around my house, which is not a scenario that thrills me with joy. So maybe I'll start with you, Fabio. Are a lot of people asking for super robots on your site?
No, not yet. We are asking people more than about 3D printing because we use that. I think that it has many, many use, like prototyping or personalization. We did, for example, a competition and with Nike for the new shoes that we launched with the last World Cup. So anyway, concerning robots, no, it's not time yet, at least in Italy or probably in Europe for sure, in Japan, South Korea, I don't know if in China also. They are starting using robots. We have just to clean our floor. I think in the UK is the same. We have robots just to clean at the moment. I don't know if we can arrive to a point like some film, like, hey, the robots is like dominating our world. I don't know, we will see. But at the moment, I don't think Europe is so. I'm sure that we have a huge market in the future because when we arrive at home at night and we are tired, or on Saturday and Sunday, we never want to wake up and say, okay, today is time to clean my house. Yeah. No, okay, so probably robots. Also for cooking, it's very interesting. I know that people want to do something like healthy for their baby or for themselves. Obviously, and robots can help you if sometimes you don't have the time to go to the supermarket or cook yourself. As Sebastian says, sometimes you spend more time to prepare something than to eat something. And robots can help you on this. So I'm sure that in the future, starting from countries like Japan and South Korea, we will be more and more robots in our house.
But then, Sebastian, I got the feeling before you were saying that the preparation was actually the joy. This is the bit where you got your fingers dirty, the tangible pleasure of cooking. So if you now have a robot to slice and dice, would you want it?
I'm sorry, Sebastian.
We're working on lots of robots, and they are doing things like warehousing, they're robot companions in the home, and even robotic furniture. The one thing that we don't do is any humanoid robots, and the principle is that, if I have a little pet and it can obey 10 voice commands, that's a pretty good pet. And and if I can produce a robot that will obey 50, it's pretty amazing. If I have a humanoid looking robot that can only obey 10 voice commands, that feels pretty dumb. So, is that all it does? But if I have a table that can obey 10 voice commands, it feels like magic, and it's like, table, go into the kitchen and get me a cup of coffee, and it's not far away, and so this is my thinking, and I think you have to think about it counterintuitively. The thing about robots and computers sort of came into the world after the Second World War, and computers have gone from what started off as being industrial objects and have found them way into our homes, into our pockets. Whereas the robots have stayed bolted to the floor in car factories, and they haven't been able to navigate themselves around. And now what we've got is GPS technology and lots of new technologies that have come along. particularly sensor technologies, which is going to make robotics suddenly realizable. But the technology has never really been there. I mean, you know, people say, why don't you put legs on your robots? Because it takes 30 times more power to put legs on a robot than have a robot on wheels. And I don't have legs on my car, so, you know, why do I need them on my robot? So you've got to think sort of counterintuitively. And I think trying to replicate human beings, trying to make sentient robots, yeah, it'll happen, but not in my lifetime. I'm a designer. I want to be no more than 18 months away from a product launch. Therefore, I have to use available technology. And what was brilliant about the iPod and the iPhone and all these sort of things is Steve Jobs put together available technologies. And you've got to see what available technologies are out there, like going to the market, see what's there, and then you prepare your meal, as it were. Sorry, that was a bit of a long one, wasn't it?
No, this
A
is...
rant.
But there's so many fascinating things, because I know we all laughed when you kind of said, conjured this idea of the table moving towards you, but then earlier you alluded to sort of design for the elderly.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
I'm imagining a scenario where suddenly actually that could have real value. So, I mean, over to you, Ruth. Do you see a scenario where you will be designing furniture that actually will respond to human command for a different sector of the populace? Because I know even IKEA are discussing certain interactivity and connectivity in their products.
I think there's two different things. So thinking about technology and furniture, you touched upon it earlier. The thing about furniture is it has a hugely long lifespan, and people don't... I mean, I always find it amazing because I have friends who spend a lot of money on a designer bag, but they balk at spending the same amount on a sofa. Yeah. And I actually don't understand it at all, but that's the reality of how people view furniture. So when we talk about things like wireless charging incorporated in furniture and things, I'm a bit timid about it because I think that the lifespan of those kinds of technologies are a completely different scale to the lifespan of the furniture. And I suppose the same could go for those things like movable furniture, but I think when it has a specific goal for example, the elderly, I think it has a lot more potential. And you're almost in a way then getting back to the Internet of Things, because I think rather than having a domestic robot who goes from fridge to kettle, you know, what we're talking about is the fridge and the kettle communicating and doing it between themselves without the robot. So I suppose the things are very interlinked in that sense.
Well, they are, and I mean, I think that's what's so fascinating about this discussion, because after we've had a few questions, I have a kind of concluding thought that I think actually takes us right to the beginning. But one more question, so if you all start thinking about questions you might want to ask, but before we do that, how about, again, taking it back to the consumer, the way that I buy things, the whole kind of idea of e-commerce, because, say, you now can invite an idea, get a product sort of prototype, but just put pictures of it up online and then crowdsource to get people's opinions about it before you actually have to make any investment. How does that change things, both for the designer and the consumer? Because I'm thinking on the one hand, I'm seeing things that I can't buy, and on the other hand, you're testing stuff without really testing it. You know, you haven't made it, so how do you know it'll be good and work?
This does not pass British standards.
Yes.
I can tell you that right now.
We may have to come back to this. Fabio, answer my long question first, and then we'll come back.
I was looking if something was starting like...
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think that for sure, as this all, we think that it's a way to connect designer, so idea, and what people needs to the design point of view, and on the other side with the company. And so for sure, yes, it's a new way of connect people to company and to their needs. On the other side, I think that digital world, it's wonderful because you can see something that probably you have on the other side of the ocean. For example, we often say that, hey, did you see something like that on US market, for example? Now with digital world, platform like e-commerce or this all in some way, you can see something that you don't see in your country, and that is very interesting. On the other side, as you said, and I totally agree, very often you have to touch something, you have to try something, you have to feel something before you buy it. So what I think that you can what I like from digital world also that website like, for example, a TripAdvisor, okay, where you read reviews, okay, and that's important because you have many people that perhaps they already buy that project and they can leave a review. And for me, it's important because, as you said, you don't want to spend money if you don't try the project. But on the other hand, you want that. You know that that product can help you in some way or because you was looking for that. So I think that if on one side, when you don't see it with your eyes and you don't touch something, you are not 100% convinced that you want to buy that. On the other side, I think that a review, for example, rendering, that we always speak around rendering, and what MADE is done until today, so they produce something, they produce a prototype, and then you can buy it before it will be produced. I think that is more interesting that you don't have the possibility to buy it.
Because I think in your initial concept of MADE.COM, you almost literally had a kind of ticker tape thing. And so when it got to a certain number, it's like, okay, now we hit go and we actually build this.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the idea of crowdsourcing and, you know, the idea, it's in a way the way that Dizal works and the fact that, for example, when we do our ETA awards, we can put it to our public vote. So, yeah, it's about, you know, asking the consumer what they want when they want it. And for us, it was actually a way of cutting out costs to the consumer because it means that we're producing something on a lead time and, you know, we're offering quite a lot to the consumer. We're offering cost savings, we're offering great design, but what we ask of them is to be patient while we make it. So that's the way that we offer cheap prices so that we don't have to then bring something in on a whim and have it in a warehouse for ages. So.
Yeah, you're cutting corners here, and this is being passed on to the consumers. And, you know, I used to design baby care equipment, and I can remember watching telly once, and there was a high chair I hadn't designed, and Lynn Folds Wood on Watchdog was putting a little carrot in there and saying, this could be your baby's finger. And if someone puts a big widescreen TV on top of a table like that, which couldn't possibly pass British standards, and a baby pulls it on top of them and kills themselves, is it the consumer's fault? Is it the designer's fault, or is it your fault? And what mechanisms do you have to prevent that happening?
Well, I guess in a way that's to confuse two different things, because one of them is to say that what we do offers cost savings, which is true, and the other is to assume that we don't have any quality control, which is absolutely not true. So behind the scenes, we have huge mechanisms. We've got a quality team working in the UK. We've got a team of over 20 people in the Far East to cover our manufacturing positions. So we make sure that we test all of our products. We have great advice within our assembly instructions and things. So I suppose what I'm saying is what we offer is not different to what the rest of the high street offer in terms of an end product. What we're offering is a different level of service to them, which means that they can get a better price for the same product.
Yeah, but if I hang 25 kilos off the corner of that table there, is it going to tip over? Because that's what the British standard for that particular type of table is.
Well, I've already got enough spotlights on me, so I can't answer specific questions. But I mean, we do test all of our products, and they are equivalent and kind of stand up to what's required of us. So.
Okay, I'm going to interject here.
Sorry. I'm being provocative deliberately, but I'm not. It is an issue with designing furniture, and when you are designing things very, very quickly, and you leave out steps, validation steps, and all this sort of thing, that there are problems do arise.
It's true, actually. I mean, I understand that, and I've seen products, not necessarily our products, but I've seen products fail. But interestingly, it comes back to what Fabio was saying about TripAdvisor and things. So, when we're online, we need a mechanism to tell our customers that we're good, and because they can't necessarily go into lots and lots of shops and see every product, we need other ways, and we make a huge use of our Trustpilot reviews. They're extremely important to us, and and we have a huge customer service team with strict targets about how quickly we can respond to customer requests. So if we get poor TripAdvisor, not TripAdvisor, if we get poor Trustpilot ratings, that's the end of the business, you know. So in actual fact, we can't just send out any old rubbish and hope that it sticks. There are other mechanisms to keep us in check and make sure we continue to do a good job.
I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming up here, because on the one hand, there is like, how do you guarantee the quality of product that doesn't exist until people say that they want it, but how do they actually know that they want it? I also have a slight issue with things like TripAdvisor, because I could sit there at home whacking in great reviews or bad reviews to something and totally skew it. So there's a lot of responsibility there with the consumer or the company, and we know there's been examples of companies skewing their own reviews and results, but we're almost going to run out of time. I knew there would be so many things to talk about here, so I think maybe we'll just take like one question, and then I'm going to ask for some concluding thoughts. But if there isn't one question, I will dive straight to the concluding thought. Okay, yes. Can I still...
Yeah, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Anatoly, founder of Dikatik, and we are making the interior design more accessible using digital technology. So I'm a huge advocate of sort of direct model and tools, online tools. However, the direct model had a huge effect on sort of established brands, and we've seen high street furniture retailers going out of the business because they can't withstand competition and erosion of sort of pricing and margins online. So with the long-term sort of view, this might limit the investments of traditional Italian, for instance, manufacturers, and the investment that they make into creating, you know, iconic pieces, because they are not going to be in such demand. So what do you think is the impact of direct model on sort of design as a whole, and are we going to see less sort of interesting product coming out of the market as a result of sort of standardization and going mainstream with design products? Thanks.
Katrin, do you want to...
Interesting question.
I disagree, just because I think the chance of more interesting products to become an audience is much, much bigger right now. So like, for example, like companies like Provenance, who's like connecting the end consumer with the production process of a thing is an amazing opportunity, which is actually making higher quality products more obvious than before. So I would say not no, and I also think like there is something to say about collective intelligence. So like all the consumers wants and needs, or like wishes coming together, might have a reason and might have it being an opportunity to produce something which has an actual need.
Okay, brilliant. And I know we're like really running out of time, so I'm going to ask you just to give me one concluding thought, because it strikes me that we're doing this talk about digital and technology on the V&A's Makers Day, and one of the most successful in terms of visitor numbers exhibitions at this museum in its entire history was an exhibition called The Power of Making, which was an exhibition of 100 exquisitely handcrafted things, from a kind of life-size bear that had been crocheted to an example of stone, dry stone walling. So my final question to each of you is, like, even with all this whizzes and bangs, are we actually coming full circle to a renewed appreciation for the handmade?
In one word, yes. I think the thing with the digital technologies or the interesting thing about it is that the way that we use it today, there's a space that's inhabited by where ancient and traditional craft meets technology, and it's fascinating to see those things that have a kind of familiarity from their history augmented by the technologies in all sorts of ways, and that's what I find kind of really interesting about what's being created these days.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when you see something craft-made, you always say, oh, that's nice, because you think that is just that one that you are looking, that is the only one piece that you see that is done in that exact way. Okay, you can see something similar, but it will be different. On the other hand, digital, obviously me and Desol, we trust in digital world. It's a new way of also combining traditional ways of crafting with the new world, with technology, 3D printing, that for me it's very interesting, etc. So yes, I agree also with Ruth.
Well, I believe that we all have a right to have happy and productive lives. And, you know, the thing is that craftsmen in Brazil, in Japan, all over the world are becoming endangered species because the ability, you know, how much people are prepared to pay for handmade things compared to things that are sort of almost made by slave labor or by machines or things like that, has devalued craft to a certain extent. And technology has the great potential to take drudgery out of our lives, but we will need to replace it with something more than just watching box sets. You know, what are we going to do with our lives that when we are being productive with our lives? And I think it's very important for people to be happy. They need to feel they're productive. And so how are we going to fill this void created by technology?
For me, I say that technology is actually a new material. I think we fit perfectly into here. I am so happy to be able to form how we carve technology in my lifetime, whereas, for example, for wood, stone, or much more traditional methods like or metal, this was way before me. So, yeah.
I'm sure we can continue the conversation online, but thank you to Ruth, Fabio, Sebastian and Katrin.